Good morning, Anne.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself, whatever you want to tell us about yourself?
Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm very
Pleasure.
grateful to be here.
Thanks
My
for coming.
name's Anne Diamond. I am owner of Resilience Rebel, and I support neurodivergent women with the emotional and practical aspects of living with neurodiversity. I'm a ADHD and EFT coach, emotional freedom techniques practitioner, and I also coach people on resilience and burnout.
Wow, that sounds really interesting.
Do you want to define what neurodivergence means to people? Because some people wouldn't have a clue what that means.
Well, people get confused with the term neurodivergent and neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is obviously neurodiversity is a diversity of how our brains work. Neurodivergent means that our brains are wired differently, and that doesn't mean we're less than. It means that we work differently. So we process dopamine and other neurotransmitters differently, and sometimes we need some support with, dealing with that. So it could affect our emotional regulation or motivation or executive functioning, but it also comes with many strengths as well. So it's unfortunately it's defined as a disorder and a disability, which I really as a newly diagnosed woman, but I'm in my 50s. I'm just finding out, I'm just learning about all these things, and I guess if that's a way of getting it recognised, which we've only been allowed to do since 2008 as adults in the UK, it's something, but it's debatable as whether it is a disorder. It's just how our society is set up to support people who have differences.
So is that something that, I suppose, how would you know? do you understand what I'm saying? How would people know if they had
a neurodivergent condition?
Yes.
Well, there are lots of diagnostic tools available. Many women, especially because it shows up differently in women because our pesky hormones affect how our neurotransmitters impact us. So many women and girls, unfortunately, are misdiagnosed with eating disorders, anxiety, mental health disorders. And it's really quite tricky unless the people who you're speaking to understand how it shows up differently in women. And there's lots of campaigns to get this gender difference recognised and get the DSM, which is the diagnostic statistic manual that allows people to diagnose these things, to be recognised, because most of the research has been done on white males. None of it has taken into account the difference in hormonal changes that could impact how it shows up in women and girls. So how you would recognise it is, I guess, if you are feeling like you're struggling, and there could be all sorts of ways it manifests. It could be social anxiety, it could be difficulties in concentrating, it could be difficulties in focusing, it could be time management challenges, or difficulties in just organising your life, getting overwhelmed, But then you could also find yourself being able to hyper-focus so much that you forget to eat, forget to drink, you forget to go to the loo. All those things are signs that you could have ADHD, or autism obviously shows up differently as well.
So is it specifically autism and ADHD? Is that how people kind of, I don't like using these words, but like slot people into a diagnosis as such?
Well, there are lots of definitions of being neurodivergent. So that could be Tourette's, or even people have acquired, if they have a brain injury or a trauma, they can acquire differences in how their brains. I was at an event last week with a gentleman who was one of the, he described himself as one of the worst injured survivors of the 7/7.
Yeah.
And he had multiple injuries and lost limbs and things, but he also had a brain injury that acquired obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
And that's impacted his life because he's got extreme anxiety as well.
Well, they go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah. So, I'm not an expert on this because I'm still learning. So I've only got my diagnosis in January, and I've done training as an ADHD practitioner. But there are lots of comorbidities that could coincide with and also autism and ADHD could be together. You could be autistic and ADHD.
Yeah.
So it's really quite complex and nuanced. And the very definition of being neurodivergent is no one's the same. You know, we all manifest this differently.
But isn't that the thing about, you know, people wanting I want to know what it is. I mean, I went to the doctors this morning because I've got earache, and I automatically assumed I had an ear infection. And we were talking about this, and I haven't. I've got like a blister and ulcer in my ear, which is a side effect of something I take.
Yeah.
But it's that you want to go to the doctors, you want to know what's wrong with you, but sometimes you don't realise there's something wrong with you. This is your norm. And is there something wrong with you if it's your norm? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Anne, you said that you were late diagnosed. I guess, you know, you've gone however many, I think you said in your 50s.
Yes.
You did that very delicately, didn't you? Bless you.
In your 50s. But, you know, I'm guessing that you were born with your diagnosis. It's not something that you have acquired. So if it's okay for me to ask, at what point did you think, I'm going to go and get diagnosed?
That's a really good question, because for many people who are diagnosed as adults, as I say, for some reason the NHS didn't allow people, even people who had diagnosis in their childhood, to be recognised as having
I didn't know that until you said that a few minutes ago.
See, I think people grow out of these things. It's how your brain's wired, you know. It's like, but for many women especially, their lived experience is that they're getting support for their children. And my experience was my daughter was having difficulties at school, and I was getting support for her, and we explored the route of ADHD. And she said, "Mum, it's the first." When we looked into it, she said, "Mum, this is the first time I've ever felt heard." So I went down the route of getting her support. We went through all the assessments with her, with CAMS, and getting support at school. And as I went through that with her, I recognised a lot of it in myself. You know, the diagnostic criteria. But to go back a bit, my story is that because if you've heard of adverse childhood experiences, I guess, because that's the work you do to support people with trauma, you can score to measure how many. Well, if you have 4 or more, you have obviously a significant chance of that impacting your health and well-being for the rest of your life, and also life limiting sometimes, depending on which route you go down. And, you know, if you turn to different ways of coping with that trauma. I scored 9. So my early trauma was quite significant and repeated. I didn't get a diagnosis of complex PTSD till I was 38. So I lived through my teens, my 20s, my 30s, not knowing why I was struggling with my mental health, not knowing why, you know, understanding why I couldn't cope, why I kept having breakdowns, why I kept burning out. I got a diagnosis of complex PTSD when I was 38, and then I started the journey of understanding how that impacted my mental health, how that impacted my behaviours, my coping mechanisms. So I'd processed a lot of that for the last 11, 12 years, and so I had a very much awareness of how I'm coping and why I might be responding in that way, what might be triggering my responses. So I'm very mindful and very aware of that, and I've done a lot of training and processing on parental alienation behaviours and all those sort of things that have impacted my life experience. But when I went through this with my daughter, I realised that was the missing piece. You add into that menopause, and that could affect how you respond. But the drop in estrogen through menopause is where the ADHD and autism symptoms show up more, because estrogen is a big factor in how you process dopamine, serotonin, neurotransmitters that affect your brain function. And we talk about menopausal brain fog, but that also is one of the symptoms, you know, ADHD as well. You know, you get brain fog and you get overwhelmed. So it just clicked in me thinking, I've been through all this. I understand the PTSD side of things. I think I understand the menopause side of things, because I've, you know, been on that journey and getting support with that, with the HRT. It's still something that is missing, and that's why. And I had to justify I had to go to my GP and justify and pretty much beg them to say, no, I want to go down right to choose and actually get a diagnosis. And it was only the charity ADHD UK, which I've become an ambassador for now because of their brilliant support. They actually allow people to advocate for themselves and say, no, I want, especially women, we need to have the support to say, I recognise this. I know myself better than anyone else, and I know there's something missing. So that's why I recognised it in myself.
And you use the terminology "something missing" in
Yes.
your world. In your world, obviously, what is that something that's missing? Do you feel? And I know that's a really hard question to ask.
Well, actually, no, it was quite simple, really, because in the 1 hour that I had the assessment with the psychiatrist for the ADHD, and bear in mind I'd spent probably a year supporting my daughter and recognising that I needed it, and then another year waiting for a diagnosis. It's been 2 years I've been processing this.
Yeah.
Pretty much imposter syndrome. Do I, don't I? Am I making this up? Is it just another thing? What's going on? You gaslight yourself into thinking it's nothing. You're used to being gaslit by society and other people. That's unfortunately the way my experience has been. And then you gaslight yourself because you doubt yourself,
Yeah.
And for the psychiatrist to give you that confirmation, and some people say, I don't want the label, but to give you that just validation that is your lived experience. And he apologised to me that I had to wait so long to get that answer. And in that moment, I had self-acceptance for the first time in my life. I accepted all parts of me.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the thing. It's not a label. It's the validation, and it's
validating your experience.
Yeah, it's validating that you do feel a little bit different or handle things perhaps differently. So, what kind of support have you now got?
Well, that's an interesting question. None, actually.
Okay.
I asked for support through local health services because it was quite a big shock, and you go through a whole grief process of
Washing machine beep. There we go.
Do you want to start again?
No, carry on.
You go through the whole grief process because once you get that validation, it's like, oh, somebody believes me. I'm not making it up in my head. It's not my mental health telling me that, I'm not being a victim. This is a real thing.
Do you feel, sorry to interrupt you, but do you feel that you're able to handle things differently now because of the validation?
Oh, yes, because those voices in your head that are telling you, because rejection sensitivity dysphoria is part of ADHD. And once you're aware of that, and the emotional dysregulation is part of it, once you're aware of that, you can actually give yourself that pause. Because I'm an EFT practitioner, I've got all the tools. I teach people these tools, but using them on yourself is usually quite hard. But once you've got that self-acceptance, say, oh, I know what this is. I understand why I'm feeling this way. Then you can use the tools to say, okay, what is this? Is this my response to unreasonable behaviour? Is this my heightened sensitivity to feeling not good enough because somebody said no, or I didn't get what I wanted at that time, or my needs weren't met, or that person didn't speak to me? Those sort of things that we all deal with every day. And you've got these like little sort of checklists to go through and go, okay, well, is it this? Is it this? Oh, okay. How can I respond to this? So it gives you that little chance to pause and choose how to respond. Because the automatic programming that's kept me safe for 52 years, I have to question that through a different lens now.
But it's interesting that you use the word safe.
Yes.
Because safe and what you're what you've experienced doesn't necessarily feel safe, does it?
No.
And I suppose that's where that internal conversation must get confused sometimes, because for 52 years you've done amazingly well to have gotten this far, but actually you're now questioning all of those 52 years of...
Yes. Yeah, and it's a grief process.
Yes, it is.
It's a grief process. And I reached out for support from the local county-wide ADHD services, and you will be astonished by this by saying, because I wasn't diagnosed in Somerset, they couldn't support me. Now, for somebody with RSD, That wasn't very nice, well received.
Wow.
And I did question them. I did write back to them and say, well, if I had cancer, would it be the same treatment? Or, if I had another health condition?
That is really bizarre. I don't understand that.
Funding and the support. They've only got the funding to support people who've waited 3 years on their waiting list to have an assessment through their service. And then they have limited capacity to support those people. Even medication, because I got diagnosed through Right to Choose, the psychiatrist, I think incorrectly, said I wasn't eligible. It wouldn't be good for me to have medication because of my age and I'm on HRT. Well, I'm sorry, but making that assessment in that 1 hour session when you've just diagnosed me probably could have done with processing and having an opportunity to consider whether medication was right for me and having a right to choose that myself. But because of the model, they basically shut my case and handed me back to my GP once they diagnosed me. So there was no follow through or follow up to see if I wanted medication. And all the inquiries I've made just to see if that would be good for me, say there's a 3-year waiting list for that.
Wow. And presumably you've got to go through the same process, which is, frankly, a waste of money.
Exactly. Waste of money, waste of time. And also considering the, comorbidities. Nothing was considered in terms of possible autism or other conditions. Yeah. It was literally just a sole focus on ADHD.
Wow.
Which you think about, many people are being traumatized and basically let down, because I've got lots of resources and I can reach out to the communities I've connected with who are ADHD friendly to support me through this. And they've been the only ones that have kept me going, quite frankly.
Yeah. And it's lucky that you have got those contacts and know how to go and reach those contacts.
Exactly, because that's the line of work I'm in,
Exactly.
But some people have got no support from family, no safety net. They're left hanging. Yeah. And unfortunately, the prison system, the mental health system is full of people who just, if they had that one piece of support, that could keep them. That could be the one piece of the jigsaw that could keep them from tipping over.
Absolutely. No, I think you're spot on, to be honest. Yeah.
And in funding wise, it doesn't cost a lot to give somebody. And the NICE guidelines, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence guidelines that were updated in 2019, they clearly state as best practice for anyone who's working with anyone who's been diagnosed with ADHD, they get emotion coaching and their families get emotion coaching, because there's a very large inherited component to ADHD and to some extent autism as well. And so if you're a child and you get diagnosed, then it's very like your parent is neurodivergent. And what support is them in terms of parenting?
But that's the thing, isn't it? It's recognising. I mean, because it's all part of the same autism spectrum. It comes under the same umbrella, doesn't it?
Yes.
And the reality is, I mean, my husband and his family are 110%, if you can have that, within that spectrum.
Yeah.
And they're all different in their own right, if you see what I'm saying. But they're all different, but have the same. They have those same key kind of components of that autistic spectrum, on whichever level and wherever you want to pop them in. And you're right. I completely concur with you. It's like we see people in the charity. We might only see one family member, but once one family member comes, we've noticed, haven't we? We start to get mother, brother, sister, and it then spans out, which is difficult because obviously we don't want the same counsellor seeing the same person, and then it's a different, even unless they come to family therapy.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult for people to accept, I would say, that there is something, because is it, I'm going to be controversial now, saying that you're different or there's something wrong with you, because not necessarily everybody wants a label. Not everybody necessarily needs a label to kind of move forward. They can move forward and gather acceptance, can't they, without having to be told they've got ADHD, they're in the autistic spectrum or whatever. They can do that. But I suppose our society very much leads to, you need to have a diagnosis to be able to, I just think it does. That's my opinion, obviously.
Yeah, I understand where you come from with that. One of the other aspects, one of the other pieces of work that I do is I'm one of the many, there's quite a big group of us who've been trained. The NHS Southwest Collaborative have trained myself and a lot of other people to deliver personalised health conversation skills training. So we train health coaches and other allied health professionals to have what matters to you conversations with patients. So like a health coach would see a patient for an hour at a time and support them with health related goals. So it could be, weight loss or whatever. Basically they get referred by the GP, or sometimes they can self-refer. And the GP can only treat a presenting medical issue, right? I mean, I've worked in social prescribing as well, so they are starting to branch out to say, okay, we can help you with non-medical issues too, but they usually refer out to a health coach or other allied health professional. And the mindset shift between what's the matter with you, which is, the medical model of disability, to what matters to you, which is more towards the social model of any differences or health, disabilities. I don't like using the term disability, but different ability. Is that fundamental shift in saying, well, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what support do you need to live a healthy and well life. So they might not need a label saying you've got ADHD or autism or any other condition, but what would support you to live well? So if you're struggling to get out of bed in the morning because your dopamine's so low you can't physically, I mean, sometimes, they talk about the spoon theory for people with, chronic fatigue or other conditions. If you can't motivate yourself to get out of bed in the morning because you just don't have those dopamines, what would help you to do that? What would help you to be a better parent to your child who has additional needs? What would help you to be able to stay in your job? I mean, I gave a presentation to a conference last week about engaging employees to reduce employee turnover. It's not about absence management. It's about, applying the Equality Act. We've had the Equality Act since 2010. We have so many characteristics: age, disability, race, religion, gender, all these things are protected by law, these protected characteristics. Why don't we use those differences, because that's all differences, to say, well, what are your needs to support you with that challenge you're facing? What barriers do you have to live in a well life? And I think that's a better approach than
a label.
And
I mean, I've worked in mental health for many, many years. And when I first started in mental health in a community-based team, they never diagnosed anybody until they were at the point where they no longer needed support and treatment from the mental health services. They gave the diagnosis after that person had healed to a degree where they could live their lives the way they wanted to live their lives. Whereas now, noticing myself, how people come in and go, I'm bipolar, I'm this, I'm that, I've got this, I've got that. And it's almost like as soon as you give that diagnosis to some people, I'm saying all people, to some people, instead of giving them an understanding of who they are, it gives them a reason not to. And I think sometimes allowing, like you said, presenting the human being and then allowing that person to decide where they want their path to go and how they want to improve things in their lives seems a lot kinder than sticking a label on somebody and saying, well, you're this and you've got to stay like this forever, because that's the other thing.
It's a learned helplessness then, isn't it?
Brilliant phrase, yeah. It is a learned helplessness, and that's something I think, and then the GP has to deal with that, and then it's really hard, and then people don't go to work, and then they lose their independence, and then we're back in that cycle of not actually helping people. We're not even holding people because we don't have the capacity to hold everybody, but we have that. People are almost in a limbo state. Do you know what I'm saying? Where they're
well, I think the challenge there is because I've just been working in reducing health inequalities across Somerset, and talking about the work that Sir Michael Marmot and his companions. I can't companions is my brain fog
compatriots.
The people who work in his field. That's what I was trying to say. Are doing and saying that we need to think about this in the wider context. If the building blocks of health aren't just being accessing treatment or diagnosis or medical care, it's how their housing is, what their employment status
is. Biopsychosocial model, isn't it?
It's the wider determinants of health. And if you have one piece of that jigsaw missing, so if you could be living quite well with whatever you've been labelled or diagnosed with, but then your relationship could break down, or you could lose your job or something, and that just tips you over to not being able to cope because you don't have the wider, your Maslow's pyramid. Your basic safety and psychological needs aren't being met.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I was involved with a homelessness group a year or so ago, and they wanted some support, and I was chatting to them, and they were talking about the group of homeless people that were there, and it's sort of I'm trying to think of what the right word is really, but essentially they provide a meal, activities, changing facilities, all of that. And the chairman at the time said, none of these people are actually homeless. We've helped them find homes, which is fantastic. But actually what they've now realised is that these people are lonely. They haven't got family, they haven't got friends, they haven't got anywhere to go during the day, they're not working. And actually they've turned into essentially a lonely group. A group of people that get together and they sit and they watch TV, or they read the paper, or they do a puzzle or whatever. And you think actually, what you were just saying is all of these dots need connecting together to make sure that you combat all the different issues across their entire spectrum, not just fix the health issue or the mental health issue or the housing issue or the unemployment or whatever. It's the whole broad spectrum of things.
Yeah, and that's a peer support group. That's what that's the definition of peer support, isn't it? That is a peer support group. Similarly, I used to be a health coach with Health Connections Mendip, and it was a brilliant case study that we were told about a leg ulcer clinic. And it used to be that the nurse would go out to each individual patient's home, treat the leg ulcer, and then go to the next patient. And they'd be all in isolation, treated individually. And they noticed that the healing times were getting longer, and it seemed that the patients were maybe not helping their ulcer to heal, because that was the only contact they had, was the nurse visiting them every week. They changed the model to the nurse being in a clinic and the patients coming at the same time to a clinic, so they were all there together, sharing their wait. In the waiting time, they were talking to each other and became a little bit of a social group. Healing times dropped massively, and they continued to socialise, bring their grandchildren in and meet each other, and it was more than treating the leg ulcers. Yeah. It was about dealing with their loneliness and isolation.
Yeah.
And that cost less. It cost less to do that because the nurse wasn't travelling around.
Absolutely.
It was one place. And, cold, hard finances, it actually cost less to do that. But actually the net gain on the wider health of those individuals was massive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's what social prescribing model's all about. Social prescribing, if you give somebody, they even paid somebody's heating bills last year. There was a surgeries paying people's heating bills.
Yeah.
If they had, I think the patient who had rheumatoid arthritis, and she was a parent, she was caring for her children. She couldn't care for her children when her arthritis was bad. When she was cold and worried about the bills, so stressed.
Yeah.
When she got £250 a month to pay her energy bills, she could have the heating on, the house wasn't damp, less respiratory illness. The children were being cared for by their parent who was less stressed. It cost, they said the £250 a month payment for the bills, I think, saved over £3,000 a month in medical.
Health, yeah.
Well, you do. Automatically, it's just that is finding that area that needs that support. And we've talked about this quite a lot. When we do a coffee and chat in
Wedmore.
Burnham,
Bridgewater.
Yeah. Bridgewater's twice in a month. And that has brought people together. But interestingly enough, Burnham's very, very busy. But the Wedmore and the Bridgewater, which are the people that really requested it, there are very few people that actually attend, which is really sad, because we know the community. In Wedmore, there's a lot of lonely people. They don't fit the those people that don't fit the, I'm going to say this, that middle class, have money, have that cohort of social. There's a group of people that are undercurrent, don't get kind of supported, and it's like they just don't attend. And it's really hard to we give it time. So we give it a year, 18 months, and then we think, right, let's move on to another area. Because we did it in Axbury, didn't we? We didn't get anybody. Nobody turned
Well,
up. We did it in Cheddar. Nobody turned up.
I think there's I mean, going back to the personalised conversation skills, the mindset shift is from both sides. It's from the professionals who are helping individuals, and it's from the individuals themselves, because a lot of people think that's not for me. You know, that's not I don't do that. But that's because that might not have been their experience or their family's experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, it's about realising that they have accountability for their own well-being as well.
Yeah.
And it's because the NHS has been so successful for the last 70 plus years, they go to be fixed. And it's actually, no, it's not about being fixed. It's about having support for you to manage your own health and well-being. And it's a big mindset shift for everyone.
It is. And I the word deprivation's bounded about a lot. And I think it's fair to say that whenever the word deprivation is used, people think of money.
Yeah.
And, deprived communities, we think money. Actually, deprivation can also be about social. And I think we have that a lot in Somerset.
Yes.
We have social deprivation for money reasons, but we also have it for social reasons. And I think places like Wedmore and Axbridge are really good examples of where there isn't enough that goes on for the social kind of, the get-togethers of older people or people that are lonely or people that are unwell, things like that.
Intergenerational activities as well.
Exactly. There isn't enough of that. And it really frustrates me when you hear in the news, we talk about social, we talk about deprivation, and it's always about money. It's a wrong sort of classification of that term. I was involved with the Prince of Wales Awards this year from Bath and West Society, and we went and looked at 3 different projects, and those projects were they were all deprived. They were all deprived communities. 2 of them were deprived financially. 1 of them was deprived socially. And you look at the one that was deprived socially, and they're all, I would say, very middle class. It's a very middle class community that they have the money to go and do things. Most of them are probably working and so on, or they're retired, but they have no community group. They have no community offering and things like that. And when we were doing some judging, it was very hard to decide who the winner was this year. And we spent a long time talking about the fact that all 3 of the projects were community projects for deprived communities, just in a different way. And I think that's one of the things that I love about what our charity does with the Coffee and Chats, is that we go out to different areas and we try and bring people together to allow them to meet others, allow them to have a coffee and a sit down and a chat with people that perhaps they've never chatted to before. Yeah,
it's like the Talking Cafes in Mendip.
Yeah.
The Talking Cafes, we have a brilliant one in Glastonbury, and it's like a social hub, because it started off as a talking cafe, but then we had Centre for Sustainable Energy there, talking about energy and grants available for warm spaces, and they've clothes exchanges, and they have an art therapy group and a poetry group and a group for neurodivergent people. So all these little groups are there in that space, but anyone could just come and drop in. It's not organised, and there's also financial advice there and job seeking advice, and all separate organisations are coming to that one hub space. And the job that I was in, reducing health inequalities in Somerset, I was talking to town and parish councils about it's not the people who already have the support you need to be talking to. It's the people who don't have the support. Yeah. It's like, why aren't they asking for it?
How do you reach those people? That's the question.
And this goes back to personalised conversation skills, because people are scared. People are scared to talk to people who aren't in their regular social circle because they're frightened of saying the wrong thing or don't know what to say. It could be just as simple as, how are you? What matters to you? Those simple questions, and actually really listening and actually taking the time to connect with people and just being interested in what's going on in their life. Because I relocated to Somerset 11 years ago. I lived in Edinburgh, and I was, in a busy city, relocated to become a carer.
You haven't got the accent?
No, I haven't got the accent. I was in Edinburgh for 20 years, and I was involved in health and safety, and I was working at Edinburgh University for nearly 20 years, and I had to relocate to Somerset to become a carer for my mother-in-law. And we were in a rural village, I had 2 children who were traumatised by leaving
Moving.
school and moving. They were in a little village school, and I had to find work and care and do all the things. I was doing 40 miles a day, just doing school runs.
Wow.
And trying to work in between that. So basically, I was completely isolated, because if you've ever done the school run in the morning in Somerset, you literally race up the road, drop the kids at breakfast club, go to drop the other one at school, come home, try and work from home. Because even before COVID, it was, it's 11 years ago, I was trying to work for myself as a consultant. And then do the school run in the afternoon, do whatever you need to do for the family and the caring. Who do you get to meet? How do you get to meet people?
Yeah.
It's very isolating.
Also, you're an outsider.
Yes, you're an outsider, and the only connections you have are through family connections.
If you've got family.
If you've got family.
And lots of people in Somerset that move to Somerset don't necessarily have family.
They don't.
And those that are part of the community have family and don't want to admit that they've got a challenge in any way, shape
No,
or form. Because community is very much that, you don't want to be different.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is where you started this conversation, really, isn't it? You don't want to be different.
Yeah. So that's it, really. So it's and nearly 50% of Somerset's communities live in rural areas. So transport, if you don't have a car,
absolutely,
and all those things. Yeah, it's a big problem.
It's very sad though, isn't it? Because I suppose for us, we have invited every single community kind of organisation to come along to the coffee and chat, so that they can bring, citizens advice, blah 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 blah. I could go on and on and on, and I'm not going to come along to the coffee and chat, so that there's another kind of string to the.
Well, it's about joint working, and it's about referring people. Oh, you need help with this. Oh, they're a really good organisation to talk to. They're most suited.
Yeah. Not a single one.
It's
sad.
I have to be careful what I say here, but there's a lot to do with funding and being seen as being competitive. But actually, interestingly, in the job I've just left, I was talking to all the big funders like National Lottery and Somerset Community Foundation and all those things. And the one, because I was giving out grants, I was managing a grants program, and the one thing that they said was, you have to collaborate. You all have to collaborate, because unfortunately, well, it's not a surprise, the funding pot nationally is shrinking.
Yeah.
And you have to collaborate, because we're seeing, like they were saying, we're seeing multiple applications from the same locations from different organisations. Well, we can't fund everything. You're doing similar things. Just talk to each other. Yeah. If you've got community buildings that need support, well, we can't support 5 community buildings in one town, but we could support one.
Exactly.
Why don't you work together and actually make a really good community building that you could all share and work from?
But one of the challenges that you've got in that circumstance is people don't want to share.
It's a scarcity mindset, isn't it?
Yes.
Absolutely. We've tried to get rooms in Bridgewater just to counselling rooms. I mean, we've been really lucky around here, haven't we? Tesco's in Burnham have been brilliant. We've got a porta cabin there. Cheddar First School now allow us to use their facilities. Other schools have allowed us to use their facilities, which doesn't come with a cost. And it's been absolutely brilliant. But when we have to start paying rent for an organisation that does everything for virtually nothing, you've then got that. It's really difficult. But other organisations are like, oh no, that's what we do. You can't possibly do anything that's related to what we do.
And there's a massive need for counselling in this county. So you think there'd be like a shared
approach
to actually reduce the burden on each community, each organisation.
And funnily enough, they've come to us and said, "Can we use your porta cabin?" Yeah, of course you can. When it's not being used, we've got it booked out, and this time, you're welcome. Oh, and then they don't use it. It's like, oh my gosh. Well, it's really hard.
I'm obviously just stepping back to the conversation about support for people with ADHD. I found there was no support at all, and I've been trying to think about setting up a group for women, particularly with ADHD, and I've been overwhelmed with offers of support. So I've got a group set up in Wells in October. A local cafe very generously offered me a room upstairs in the cafe for free. Yeah, brilliant. And there's a brilliant charity in Glastonbury called Growing Happiness, and they do support groups for various things in terms of gardening and art related activities, and they've offered me a space as well. So
that's really good.
That's. Do you think, and I'm going to be controversial again, do you think part of that is because of you know, Glastonbury's alternative approach to life, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful manner. I mean the fact that they embrace being alternative, so therefore they're more likely to. I mean, we've got a cafe in Bridgewater and we've got a cafe in Wedmore. That the one in Bridgewater, we don't pay anything other than we pay for everybody's tea and coffee and cakes if they want to come. So nobody has to feel embarrassed about money. So we do that, but that, you know, we have that, but it's not. Glastonbury seem to have an awful lot of it. They're very generous with their sharing.
I think Glastonbury's got quite a lot of deprivation. Of, you know, it's multiple deprivation. It has got 2 of the lowest 20% areas in the country, and there's raised normal for Glastonbury, which locals embrace, or most of us do anyway. There are a few diehards that don't. They wouldn't do that anyway. And I think there's a lot more acceptance that people, there's a wide spectrum of people in the world, and they have different needs. And there are some really nice, kind-hearted people living there, and I think they're the ones that are leading the way that run these organisations. Yeah,
it's nice, isn't it?
Yes.
It's nice, and you got to celebrate these people because, you know, they're the ones that are usually doing it without being paid or just doing it from the good of their heart, aren't they?
Like you said, there is a lot of that.
Yes.
I'm conscious of time.
Yes.
You've brought some lovely looking books with you. I wonder if you wanted to talk about them.
Thank you. Well, this time last year, I was struggling with imposter syndrome and obviously waiting for my ADHD diagnosis and not realising that you know, this thing. And I'd written a book called Turning the Tables on Burnout, and it was published last October. And I did it because, you know, we all say we've all got a book in us, and I invested in a coach to help me to get it done, because I knew I wouldn't have got it done if I hadn't got someone to keep me accountable. But I've been overwhelmed by the response to it, because I don't talk about neurodiversity at all in the book. It's just purely about, because it's basically I was in health and safety for over 20 years before I went back to art college when I was 48 and did an art foundation, because I was tired of burning out being a health and safety consultant. And that changed my life, because it actually helped me to realise that we can celebrate mistakes and learn from them, and art and creativity is one of those processes that, after 20 years of being scared and terrified of making mistakes, because you can't do that in health and safety, you know, and you have to sort of look for everyone else's non-compliances.
Of course.
So going to art college was a complete breath of fresh air, and 2 years of studying and exploring and being playful with creativity opened myself up to thinking, actually, there's a different way of doing this. That's why I moved more into being creative with wellbeing practices. So I've combined everything, really. So the book is about, you know, how we burn out, why we burn out, and ways of moving through that burnout and breaking the cycle, because the behaviours and ways you deal with challenges that lead you to burning out, so people pleasing, overworking, you know, not being able to say no, and actually the working practices, because burnout is often placed on the individual, saying, oh, you're not resilient enough, you need to be more resilient, or just take a couple of weeks off work and then you'll be fine. No, it's chronic. The World Health Organization definition is chronic exposure to work-related stress. Chronic exposure over a long period of time, work-related stress. That's not on the individual, is it? That's on the working practices. That's on how we organise work. And the World Health Organization, International Labour Organization, did research saying that working over 55 hours a week is classed as overwork. How many people do that? Yeah. So that actually is directly linked to stress-related illnesses, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, many other illnesses that we wouldn't attribute to being work-related. So how many people are suffering from heart disease, stroke, diabetes? Quite a lot of them are attributed to stress. That kills more people a year than malaria.
Wow.
And it's an epidemic, global epidemic. And I think COVID and lockdowns really put a focus on people's working practices, and people have changed so much. There's been quiet quitters. You know, all these things have happened in the last few years. People have really reframed how they approach work and jobs. So this book was my culmination of over 20 years work experience, and deciding that it's time to start talking about this. And I've been to book fairs and done talks on it, and everyone I've spoken to who's read it and listened to my talks about it has come and shared some quite vulnerable stuff, their own personal, people I don't know, they've shared their lived experience with me, and they felt able to talk about it. And for me, that's the reason for publishing it.
Yeah, of
to allow
course.
more people a voice and to say, no, this isn't right. I need to change how I live because I want to live. And if you've ever read the book, 4,000 Weeks, Oliver, what's his name? I can't remember his name. He used to be a gardening columnist. So if you live to the age of 80, you've lived for 4,000 weeks.
Wow. Which, when you put it like that, is not that many.
Not that many. So how do you want to spend those weeks? I don't want to spend them in burnout. I had 9 months off work when about 12 years ago because I was so ill with and depression. I couldn't look after my kids, couldn't do anything. And I don't want anyone to experience that.
And I think you've got a really interesting point there around burnout and responsibilities as employers as well as employees, because it is a partnership. Whatever way you want to look at it, it's a partnership. And to provide an environment where people have the capacity to be able to communicate their needs, not just the company's needs. It's, I have my own company, and I know we spend a minimum of an hour a month. It's only an hour a month. And I also have another member of staff that also spends half an hour, 30 minutes mid-month with each member of the team, because, and we found amazingly that makes such a difference, even if it's just the space for that person to be able to say, I can't do this. I don't want to do this.
Valued.
Or I feel that I can say that to you and not feel embarrassed about the fact that actually I've picked the wrong job, or I've, whatever, it doesn't matter. And there's no shame in that. It's just about how do we help you to get where you need to get to be able to get your career. I mean, recently one of our members of staff left and went to do a completely different job, but actually good for him. If that's what he wants to do, absolutely. And when he first talked about change, I went, embrace it now. Don't leave it 3 years. Don't look at your 3-year plan. If that's what you're feeling you need today, let's support you in it today. And okay, you could say, oh, you've got to get another member. So, oh dear. But as an employer, I'd rather have a happy team than an unhappy team. Definitely. Every time.
And presenteeism costs the economy far more than absenteeism. Yeah. People focus on, because I judge an International Health and Safety Award, and we talk about their injury rate and their staff, but they measure absenteeism and sickness absence. They don't measure presenteeism, and they don't measure staff turnover either.
Well, that's funny you say that.
That's a better indicator about the performance of a business than how people are taking time off sick. Yeah, because people don't give real reasons for taking time off sick.
But people don't take time off sick if they feel supported. People will only take time off sick when they feel unsupported and when they're not being heard. And I think and I've noticed that in our workplace, people that get heard will very rarely go sick. They very rarely get sick because they're being heard.
Exactly.
And when you don't hear somebody, then actually 9 times out of 10 they become sick.
And in terms of business costs, taking 10 minutes out of your day or half an hour a week to check in with employees, see how they're doing, costs far less than covering them when they're off sick, doesn't it? Yeah. Or replacing them, because it can cost up to 150% of their salary to retrain and recruit a new person.
Absolutely. So. I'm in your...
Yeah. So, I mean, but we've had Health and Safety at Work Act for 50 years, over 50 years. That's an employer's, has a duty of care to not harm employees. That includes psychological harm. Yeah. And we've got international standards on psychological safety at work. We've got NICE guidelines. We've got and the stress management standards. They're all there. They're all talked about in the book. But it's not the employee. The analogy I love to share is, if you had a pond of beautiful koi carp, one fish got sick, you'd treat the fish, wouldn't you? If all the other fish started getting sick,
you'd treat the pond.
You treat the pond. What is the pond? It's the organisation and our employment system. So,
in counselling field, you have what's called supervision, which a good supervisor has the capacity to look at the organisation, the individual, and then the customer, client, and to be able to do that in a professional way. But the amount of people that go for that support and either go for the cheapest person or the person that actually is not in tune with that person. And it's so sad, because you end up yourself as a practitioner not being able to then do a good enough job because you're not well enough yourself to do a good enough job.
I'm an EFT practitioner and I have to have mentoring and to keep my practice. And reflective practice is good, but unfortunately, people see that as a challenge to their capabilities or competence, don't they? Reflecting on their performance and how it's impacted other people. So yeah.
Great embrace. So you got another book there, or is that just your note?
This has just arrived yesterday. With my book, Turning Tables on Burnout, I gave 10% of my royalties to PTSD UK because obviously it's a charity close to my heart. And one of the things, my creative practice is I use poetry to support, processing and expressing how I feel. And PTSD UK have published this amazing book called Hiding in the Sea from the Rain. And it's written by people who support PTSD UK. It's poems.
Oh, wow.
It's poetry. And I've got 4 poems in there. So I was quite proud of that.
Oh, well done.
It's really good.
That's something that we did in the rehab a few years ago. In fact, Dave came across a copy of it. We're sorting the house out. And Dave came across it. We did exactly the same. And we had a poetry evening at Burnham-on-Sea Theatre. It was really, people, it's just a great way to express yourself.
Well, I love running poetry workshops and doing that as a socially engaged thing, because actually getting people to express themselves through poetry, even if it's just cutting up magazines and newspapers and found poetry, it's what words that speak to them. It could be their subconscious sort of saying that resonates with me. That's them getting it out of their head and getting clear in it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I've really, really enjoyed you talking.
Oh, thank you.
And it's really nice to meet you as well. You kind of think you go, would you like to come on the podcast? And so many people are nervous to come on the podcast. And what am I going to talk about? Blah, 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 blah. But actually, it's just like 3 of us sat in a room having a chat and
coffee and
about each other. And it's really nice to meet like-minded people, and I've really appreciated you giving your time.
I met one of your colleagues through the djembe drumming circle in Wales, and you've started doing djembe drumming now. So
is that Andy?
Yeah. So I've obviously been interested in the work of your charity for a while, and I appreciate what you do. So it's been really great.
And she's now got a drumming group.
I know she has. Yeah, I'm keen to come along because I'm a percussionist. So So I'd love to come along and join.
Anytime, you're more than welcome.
We'd love to get you back on the podcast as well.
Yeah, it'd be really nice.
Come and chat more, because I think you've probably got more stories and more things to tell. So yes,
it's one of the problems with ADHD. You do talk a lot.
No, it's been fantastic.
It's been brilliant. Thank
Just
you.
Before we end, do you want to tell everybody where they can find your book and also the PTSD UK book?
Oh, sure. The PTSD UK book is available from the PTSD UK website, and all the funds from that go towards the charity, supporting the charity. They're a small charity based in Edinburgh, but they work nationally. And Turning Tables on Burnout is available on Amazon, but I've also got it on Ingram Sparks. If any independent booksellers want to stock it, they can stock it through Ingram Spark, through the wholesalers. So, yeah. And also, I do have author copies at home if anyone knows me and wants to get in touch. And I'm resiliencerebel.com.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on, Anne.
Thank you.
It's been great.
Thank you.